Bills Mafia, football fans, happy Tuesday evening to all of you. And thank you all so much for tuning into this week's episode of Under Review. That right, red light is on. I said I wasn't going to flub the intro, but I did. That red light is on, which means this topic is officially live. And joining me tonight is Cover One's very own Uber Hansen, as the two of us are going to look at the Buffalo Bills 2024-25 schedule, go over some of the matchups we like, some of the stretches that we think are tough or favorable for the team, and then give some early insight as to what we feel is the Buffalo Bills floor or ceiling. Thank you all so much for being here again. My name is Joe DeRosa. You can find me on Twitter at show_DeRosa. And without further ado, let's go.
Previous play will go under review.
Friends, once again, thank you all so much for being here on Tuesday night for this week's episode of Under Review. If you could do me a favor and be as kind as to drop a like on this video, share it with your friends who are Bills fans who might not know about the channel, share it with people that are football fans but not Bills fans, any other kind of, niche category you can think of. Give it a like, give it a share. It is greatly appreciated. And speaking of appreciation, I have an appreciation for my guest who is joining me this evening, returning to the show. I think it's like the fifth or sixth time. I'm not sure, but Uber Hansen, thank you so much for being here. How you doing this evening?
Dude, I'm great. I always love coming on Under Review. I think we tend to have very good conversations, and the schedule talk is something I'm interested in. So I think this will be fun tonight.
Well, appreciate that. Yes, we do. Honestly, every time you're here, it's always a fun discussion. I feel like we go back and forth very well. Anytime I've been on your show too, on Roundup, it's been a lot of fun. So before we get into the actual schedule talk, though, I do want to just, briefly ask you, with OTA starting and everything, voluntary at least, how are you feeling about it? I mean, anything that's caught your eye so far? Any thoughts you have on it as it's just begun?
Yeah, I mean, this is going to sound kind of weird, but the vibes seem immaculate right now. And I don't know if they've felt immaculate the past couple years. Obviously, a certain player is no longer on the Bills, which is both good and bad. But it's fun to see some of the videos come out today, especially like Keon Coleman. This kid, I don't even know what to say, but I'm falling in love with this guy. He is so incredible. If he's half as good on the field as he is off the field, like, the Bills got a star in the making. And you see him kind of hugging DeMar Hamlin and catching routes from Josh and talking to the reporters, talking to other players. Like, he seems like he's the perfect locker room guy. Will it translate to the field? I'm super excited to see that.
I'm excited to see it too. I loved seeing him and Allen just getting the chemistry in. I also love that, in the many handshake videos that were posted, he and Coleman have just a very standard, like, business-like handshake, which just feels so on brand for a guy like Coleman, who's like such a jokester. It's just like, no, we're joking about everything else. Let's just be serious in this one thing that we do. But yeah, man. I mean, I love this time of year just because now you got the draft picks integrating with the veterans and guys like, Keon Coleman, Dwayne Carter, Cole Bishop, all getting their reps in with some of these players that have been here for a minute that might be able to, pass some wisdom along, give them some insight as to what training camp's going to be like. All positive things for a now very young Bills team, or at least shaping to be a lot younger. I'm really looking forward to it. And also, just again, seeing Josh Allen throw to Keon Coleman finally is fun. I hope it works out. Really just hoping that he pans out as a rookie, because he's so likable as a person and has really just made concerted efforts to endear himself to the fan base, which, everyone appreciates. I mean, that story where about him with the bracelet on that kid just sent him. That's awesome. That's like just stuff you don't have to do, but you're seeing him do it. And I love that. And I'm really rooting for him. But let's talk about the schedule, and really let's just start with our general thoughts on it, because one thing that I think a lot of people can agree on is that it's not easy by any stretch of the imagination. Now, obviously when schedules are posted and the strength of schedule metric is put out, that is based on last year's results. That does not particularly mean that they are going to be the same teams this year. However, a lot of the teams that the Buffalo Bills are going to face have a stable foundation, have a lot of really highly touted, talented players, guys that might be entering, second year, like CJ Stroud and the Texans, guys that might be getting healthier, like Anthony Richardson and the Colts, and then some familiar foes like the Jets, who, if they're healthy, are going to be tough, Kansas City. So I just want to ask you, before we get more deep into this discussion, your initial thoughts on the schedule and really just anything that you feel strongly about with it.
Yeah, right. We know all the opponents. We know the home and away going into the off season, but I do think the schedule does shed some light. Like for me, at least, I could probably move win and loss predictions up and down by a game, maybe two, depending on how rough the schedule sets up. And when the Bills' schedule first got released, just giving it a once over, it's fair. I think that's the best way to put it. Like I look at it and I'm like, there's nothing awful on here, considering we know who's going to be on here. There's no awful stretches. I mean, there's a couple we'll probably talk about that aren't great, but it's pretty fair, and I think it sets up the Bills really well for their ability to compete throughout the year. So even if they fall behind early on to, say, the Dolphins or the Jets in the division, they have a path still open at the end of the season to make a run for their fifth consecutive AFC East title. It's not easy. I think it'd be crazy to say it's easy. It just simply isn't. But I really don't think any team in the AFC is going to have an easy title, because right now, for some reason, every good quarterback's in the AFC. So you're going to have to go through a gauntlet of quarterbacks. You're going to have to go through a gauntlet of teams. And then on top of that, the Bills also have to, go to San Francisco or host San Francisco. They have to go to LA. They have to go to Detroit. Like, they have a rough NFC schedule too. So it's not going to be easy. I think the Bills are still one of the best teams in the NFL, though. So I think it's not some insurmountable schedule for them.
Yeah, I agree with that. Every person knew it was going to be tough when you looked at the division they were going to have to play. And then you look at the team won the division. So naturally, they're going to get the best of the remaining. So when you look at Baltimore being on the schedule and then first place of NFC North in the rotation, so Detroit on the schedule. And of course, you have to face other division leaders like the Texans, who won it. And they're obviously an emerging, talented team. It's not easy. But the one thing that I think I've noticed with the schedule that seems to be like giving me some sense of calm. Like last year when the schedule got released, I was a little nervous, especially when I saw that final stretch of like Kansas City or Philly, Kansas City, Dallas, all of them. It's almost like every other thing besides opponent worked out in the Bills' favor to some degree, right? Because you look at just even how the schedule starts. You have Arizona at home opener. So an NFC team is coming to Buffalo, one that, West Coast timing has to play on the East. Won't really matter that much in week one, but it's getting an NFC game to start, meaning even if you dropped it for whatever reason, that's not going to affect your conference record like dropping the Jets did last year. And then following that up with a Thursday night game in Miami. Now, I have said I don't like Thursday night games. I don't like them against division rivals, and I stand on that. I do not like them at all. However, if you were to ask me the best case scenario to play Miami, it would be in Miami at night early in the year so that their weather advantage is gone. And it's completely eradicated here. And you get this opportunity to, potentially go into Miami when both of the teams are coming off Sunday games, not as rested. And the Bills have to deal with their NFC opponent first, meaning even if you drop that, the conference record isn't touched. Maybe it's not to say that you're looking past the Cardinals, because you shouldn't. I think they're going to be tough, but rather that Thursday game could stay in your sights a little bit more, where the less consequential loss or win, whatever it may be in week one, now comes to Thursday, and it's let's consider our efforts to get this AFC win on the road out of the way. So that's one thing. And then, like you said, the end of the schedule shapes up in their favor. I think the Patriots, unlike a lot of people, are going to be tougher. I said this last year too, and then they ended up winning like 4 games. But I'll still say it. I think they're going to be tough. I think they're going to have a good defense. But I think they're an emerging team, might not reach the ceiling that they set out for themselves right away. Something that I think in the could be like a 9-win team at best, maybe even 10, or like a 5 to 6 win team just feeling it out if they're still having
Mm,
trouble with their quarterback development. So that ending of the schedule could work in the Bills' favor where you have those 2 home games against New England and the Jets, close it out on the road. Maybe the Patriots are out of it, fighting for draft position. Like they might not give you their all, even though they love playing spoiler. It's really as tough as some of these opponents are. I don't view it as a schedule that has too many disadvantages as far as when you rest, as far as, going to Europe and coming back. They don't have that on the schedule. And for that, I'm a fan,
mm.
ironically enough, of it. But I mean, any other thoughts on this? Anything we didn't touch on?
No, I think you made a really good point there with the Bills opening with the Cardinals prior to their divisional matchup on a short week against the Dolphins. The Bills can drop that game. The Bills shouldn't drop that game, and I
Right.
think it would be a pretty rough start to the season if you drop a game to the Cardinals. I'm with you though. I think the Cardinals are going to be sneaky. I don't know, good. I'm going to say sneaky good. I think they're going to be competitive. I don't think they're going to be the dumpster fire that they were last year. So I don't think that's a gimme of a game, but
Mm.
that point, it does extend to the Dolphins, who open up the season at home against the Jaguars. So if the Dolphins drop that game against the Jaguars and then they drop that game against the Bills, now they're 0-2 in conference, 0-1 in
Yeah.
division. They're in big trouble to start the season, where Buffalo has a little bit more, leeway. If Buffalo starts 0-2, it's not the end of the world. They can still figure it out. I think Bills fans would be in full panic mode if they start 0-2.
Oh, yeah.
I might even be a little panicky if they dropped a game to the Cardinals and to the Dolphins to start the season. But yeah, I think the schedule, for the most part, it provides them a lot of different paths and ways that the season can progress without me ever getting to a point where I'm like, yeah, it's over. Like they
Yeah.
just can't. There's no way for them to get out of this hole they've dug themselves. Like they legitimately have a way at the end of the season to catch up to whoever it is, if it's the Dolphins, Jets, or to simply just run away with the division entirely.
Yeah, and we got to remember, divisional rivals are playing the same conferences too, so they
Mm,
also have to deal with the AFC South. They also have to deal with the NFC West, which are going to both be formidable in their own right.
no.
So, I mean, for as much as you might be concerned about, well, could the Bills have a hard time if they play, Arizona's emerging, San Francisco comes to Buffalo? That same thing could be said about Miami, New England, and the Jets, who open up against San Francisco on the road. Now, granted, again, they have that benefit of an NFC team to start too, but it's tough for everybody. And I think that with
Yeah.
that in mind, it's not the end of the world, like you said, if they started 0-2. We don't want them to. No one here is saying start 0-2. It's okay. We want them to be 2-0. These are games that they should be winning, considering that Arizona, while emerging, is unproven. And Miami is just a team you've been able to beat the past few years. Keep
Mm.
that standard up. But it's also just, well, if you had to start the schedule in any way, you're starting it with the less consequential of the potential losses, and you're getting that road Miami game out of the way, which I think is important. But
Yeah.
Uber, I want to ask you just a little bit more about some of the specifics of the schedule and really just kind of the stretches that you see that you think are the ones that you're kind of circling as like imperative because they're difficult, or something that you look at as like, this is an opportunity. This is really advantageous for the Bills.
Yeah, the first of them I'll bring up, and I think that this is one a lot of fans have already circled, and I think it's the hardest stretch for the Bills, is that trio of away games after their first three. So you go to Baltimore, to Houston, to New Jersey, like
Mhm.
Ravens, Texans, Jets. Look, the Ravens I still think are going to be one of the top teams, if not the top team in the AFC going into the playoffs. The Texans, I tweeted it today, like people got to pump the brakes on them a little bit. I think they're going to be a good football team. I just don't think they're going to be this world beater everyone's making them out to be. And then the Jets, I spoke about this on the Cover One Roundup last week. Like the Jets' ceiling, and I don't think a lot of Bills fans want to hear it, their ceiling is to win the Super Bowl. Like they're that talented on paper that they can go win the Super Bowl. The
Yeah.
question is, what is Aaron Rodgers at his current age, and can they stay healthy? So that game against the Jets, unless who knows what how healthy they'll be or how healthy the Bills will be, but it's going to be a rough game. So that trio of games, the Bills got to win one. They can't go 0-3 in that stretch because again, it's against three AFC teams. But if they can leave that stretch 1-2, not great. 2-1, 2-1, 3-0, they're golden. Like if they go 2-1 in that stretch, you're going to be talking about the Bills fighting for the 1 seed by the end of the season.
Yeah, that one is certainly tough. I mean, I look at it as that's where my eye has been glued to this
Mm,
entire time because I have the schedule pulled up on my screen and I've just been looking at it and it's like Jacksonville, it's a home game, Monday Night Football. I love that. I love that Jacksonville, Trevor Lawrence are actually coming to Buffalo this
yeah.
time and that the home game is not in Europe. I love, that Baltimore matchup on the road. I mean, that one's also a night game, so you get a little bit of a break, but like still, it's a Sunday night game. So it's actually
Mm,
no, there's no break at all. And then going from Sunday night football against Baltimore, Sunday 1 p.m. to Houston, back to Monday night against the Jets, like that's a really tough schedule,
yeah.
especially primetime games, man. Like it's just a lot of nighttime action, a lot of big spotlight, a lot of pressure on the team. This is a game that, you look at Baltimore, who's still constructed with a lot of weapons.
Mm,
Houston, again, we know what they have. We know about Diggs. They've built their roster up tremendously. Their trenches are great. Their D line has been revamped. And then, of course, the Jets, who, when healthy, like you said, that's Super Bowl contention. Their defense is Super Bowl caliber as
yeah.
it is. If you keep Rodgers upright with stable protection, they're going to be tough. They're going to be
Mm,
good. So, like, that stretch is brutal. And then even following it up with Tennessee, which is a week 7, 1 o'clock game, but that's technically short rest. And the Titans, I don't think, are a slouching team either. So,
mm.
yeah, man, that's tough. That's a really tough stretch. But like you said, if you can go 2-1, somehow 3-0 in the first 3 games, that's a great position to be in against 3 AFC opponents.
Yeah, and I think what the added pressure there for the Bills, like those are all pressure packed games because they all have some storylines built into them. And I know the players will downplay them all, but each of them has storylines. You look at the Baltimore game, Lamar Jackson versus Josh Allen, redemption maybe for the Ravens for that playoff loss. You look at the Texans game, obviously Stephon Diggs, and you look at the Jets game. Look, it's the Jets are going for the crown of the AFC East title, and they've been talking all off season how they're going to win the Super Bowl. They're going to win the AFC. And you have a lot of, talking heads around the country saying that
Mhm.
the Jets are the team to beat in the AFC East. So I think each of those games has added pressure by the fact that they have all these underlying storylines that are going to play like a major role throughout the season. Again, the players are going to downplay it, but I think it's all kind of a ruse that when the players do that. I think this is all in their heads a little bit, and you tend to see that after the game, especially when they win, they start to bring up those storylines and little like jabs back at those teams or what have you.
And I'd be stunned if the Bills don't have some chip on their shoulder. I mean,
Uh,
and understandably so. Like, listen, you have a lot of roster turnover. You lose a lot of veterans. Jordan Poyer goes to Miami. Micah Hyde is kind of in limbo, but figured he's quote unquote retired unless he pulls an Eric Weddle. You talk about losing Stephon Diggs, trading him off. Gabe Davis signs elsewhere. Like a ton of turnover on this roster. And
mm,
with turnover comes new players, and with new players comes question marks. You don't know what the high
yeah.
output could be. You don't know if they're going to reach their floor. That's why I wanted to do this episode, was to kind of get into that conceptually. Wow, I just completely brain flatlined. That concept,
Uh,
man, it's been a long day. I stutter all the time, but sometimes it's just like it hits me like a brick. But
you're good.
talk about that concept. And I feel like this team does have a chip on their shoulder. They
Mm,
are looking at these games and saying, hey, everyone's going to write us off. We have more underdogs on this schedule than we have over the past 3 years. Like,
mm,
let's, use it to our advantage. Let's surprise people. Because one thing that I think matters when you talk about the Bills and evaluating the team is those question marks are always given a negative connotation, right? Like, we don't
yeah.
know what they are. So I'm going to go with Baltimore. I'm going to go with Houston. I'm going to go with the Jets because their ceiling's high. You don't know if that question mark unravels into, maybe something along the lines of, wow, their passing attack's actually a lot better than we thought it was going to be because
Yeah.
Coleman's emerging quickly, or Dalton Kincaid's taking a year 2 leap, or wow, their defense is actually really freaking good because their starters are still there. They didn't go anywhere. They just added, well, I can't say that because their safeties changed, but like maybe Bishop emerges quickly. Maybe Mike Edwards is an immediate contributor. Like, it goes both ways. So I
Mm,
think it's fair for a lot of fans to be like, see that part of the schedule and be concerned, or for pundits, national media to say like it's a tough break for the Bills. It might be, but also if this team can exceed expectations, which they've done before under Josh Allen, I think it could be a lot of fun and a great opportunity for them to really shock some people again, despite having a franchise quarterback and being in a spot that they want to be with hopes for contention. But I'll ask you this: any other parts of the schedule, any other stretches you like, things that like, really just things that you think are impacting the Bills one way or the other?
yeah, I think So there's a couple ones that excite me. I'll just throw this one out there. The fact that they end with Patriots, Jets, Patriots. I already kind of alluded to this early on. Is they always have a way back. Like if they're down by 2 games with 3 weeks to go, they have a way back because they have those 3 divisional matchups. They have 2 games against the Patriots and they host the Jets. Like if the Bills go 3-0 in those final 3 games of the season, not regardless of what's happened before that, but to an extent, they have so much cushion built in because of those 3 games. I love how that they end the season like that. Like that's
Mhm.
really really exciting to me. I also add like I do like the idea of the dome stretch they have a little bit like the
Yeah.
Rams and the Lions. I like that they go play in the dome in the towards the end of the season. Josh Allen's a freak in the dome. Like he's so
Yep.
much better, and that's statistically prevalent throughout the NFL. It's about 10 points higher per passer rating when you play inside. So sending Josh Allen into a dome late in the season, like that should kind of benefit the Bills to some extent. I don't really like the idea of playing in Detroit though, because that field is an absolute disaster. But yeah, that end of the season, I think like you look at San Francisco, LA, and Detroit, and I think a lot of people are like, oh my goodness, what are we gonna do about that? And I'm excited about it, especially San Francisco is coming to Buffalo as Buffalo is coming off a bye week, and the Bills almost always or they always win off the bye
Yeah.
week
They're
when they
undefeated.
play in the McDermott era. So it's an exciting end to the season for sure.
Yeah, and one thing I actually noticed, I never caught this too, is the same argument I had for NFC to open the season. Well, now you're entering December with a stretch of 3 straight NFC games. So if you can kind of shore up your AFC
Mm,
record and then go into that stretch where, again, you still want to be winning these games, but it's like the not so consequential if you've kind of padded yourself with a good record and like you can afford to drop one of these games because then once that stretch ends, and you end your back-to-back road dome games. I said road dome on the air, and you end your back-to-back games on the road in LA and Detroit. You have Patriots at home, so you look forward to that home AFC game. Jets at home, another one, and then you end it with New England. So I mean, that's another part of it too. Just getting that weird stretch of 3 NFC games, which I don't remember for the longest time. Like I remember they had stretches of like 2 games in a row, but when was the did they have 3 this past year? I don't think so
I,
because they
I
played
I can't imagine
no.
like that's actually a good thing to point out. That's got to be pretty rare, especially historically rare, right? Because there was a point where you only played 4 NFC teams. Now you're playing the five
Yeah.
NFC teams. I wonder. That's actually a good thing to kind of look up and do a little research on. I don't even know
Yeah.
how I do that research for every team in the NFL, but for the
You have to look
Bills,
at
yeah,
every
I can't remember
schedule.
that ever.
Every
Yeah,
individual schedule for every team going back the past 20 years and find it. But yeah, San Fran, LA, Detroit, and then you got the 3 AFC games to close it out and divisional games, mind you. So
yeah.
really weird pauses, especially coming out of the bye week to those 3 teams. But I mean, I think I look at the schedule, and the only other stretch that I kind of like for the team in a weird way is the Seattle game going back to it's like Seattle, then they come home against Miami,
Mm,
then Indianapolis on the road, and then that Kansas City game at home before the bye week. Like, not that saying it's easy. It's just one of those things where I kind of like the fact that that Miami game is now home in November, even though I don't think the elements are really going to play a role in this game. November in Buffalo could still very well be like high 50s. But really, just getting out of that gauntlet, you have the Titans game. I don't think it'll be easy, but that is a home game coming off that road stretch. Then going over to Seattle, so the NFC game again, and then coming back, you have Miami, you have that divisional game, that rematch. In case you didn't take the
mm,
first one, this is your opportunity to get it right, especially after that road trip. Indianapolis, I think, is going to be a tough game, but I think it's a game that, when you put the 2 teams up head to head right
right.
now, the way it looks, I think it's a winnable game for the Bills. And then Kansas City's a true test. So I just think that stretch is impactful too for the reasons of getting those home games after the road stretch. And then also looking at it as like, this is your opportunity. Like, there's no breaks, man. There's no breaks in the schedule whatsoever, unless you want to call the very end a break. Like, go out there and go 2-2 on the stretch, go 3-1 on this stretch. Like, just stay 500, and I think you
Mm,
have a really good chance going into your bye to secure a playoff spot by that point. Because again, coming out of that, you still have the NFC teams, which conference record won't be impacted much. And then you look at the final stretch where you could easily, if your team's clicking, win 2 of those 3 games or go 3-0 and actually have a formidable playoff spot. But any other thoughts on this, Uber?
yeah, That 4-game stretch that you talked about, just like looking at it right now, the games leading up to that is that Houston or that Baltimore Houston Jets stretch, right? Which
Mhm.
which we talked about. That's going to be critical to their season. But let's say just theoretically they're 3-3 going into that 4-game stretch that you had mentioned, which is quite possible. Like they start the season 3-3. Again, I think you'd have a lot of Bills fans panicking. But that stretch, Tennessee, Seattle, Miami at home, and at Indy, they could go 4-0 there, and then suddenly a 3-3 team is a 7-3 team, and all concerns are to an extent quelled as you
Yeah.
head or you host Kansas City. And the week before the Bills play Kansas City, now I know what the Broncos are. I think the Broncos are going to be absolutely terrible this year, but they are a division opponent, and Kansas City is playing a division opponent the week before. There's
Mhm.
something to be said about those teams playing a little bit harder. So maybe Kansas City comes in there after taking a beating against the Broncos and gives the Bills a little bit of a kind of a breather against that team heading into their bye week.
Yeah, you never really know. And I think, it's still early, so obviously when you do a schedule episode, it's hard to truly tell. You don't know what these
Mm.
teams are going to look like. The complexion can be totally different. Every year it's always, well, the schedule looks tough, and then something changes in your matchup, whether it's a key defensive player's out, a key receiver's out, and then it's a
Mhm.
completely different conversation. I think just looking at it right now though, that stretch too, like I think that they're probably going to be favored over the Titans. I think they can win that game. It's also a new regime. Like Will Levis has to take that year 2 leap. If
Oh
Will
yeah.
Levis isn't taking that leap, I actually like Levis, but if he doesn't, under the new leadership, Callahan takes over, it doesn't translate well. That could be problematic, even despite the free agency signings they made. Seattle is another team that's really interesting because I think if this was a home game, I would be like completely sold that it's a Bills
Yeah.
win, like with their eyes closed. But going to Seattle is always tough. It's really hard to win there, especially if you're an AFC team from across the country that never goes to Seattle. But on paper, I mean, like, I would take Josh Allen over Geno Smith. Maybe
Yes.
that their wide receiver core, I would say, is better than the Bills
Yeah.
currently. I mean, that's room to be, changed based on how the season progresses. But I like the Bills in a matchup against Seattle. I think there's could be success there. I think again, you come home against Miami, and that's a prove it game. And it's just again, when you have Miami coming to town with the current climate, it's a hard place to win. Miami still needs to do it with Tua. They haven't yet. So that's another thing where it's just history's favoring the Bills in that matchup. The Indy game's a complete wild card to me, but again, I just think that head to head right now, it should be the Bills game to lose. And I think they could take it even with it being a road game. And
Mhm.
also a big question mark there is Anthony Richardson, who got
Yeah.
hurt, 4 games into the year this past year. I mean, he's got to stay on the field. And if he doesn't, that's a massive problem for them. And I like the Colts. I like what they're building up. I think that team has a lot of talent, especially going and getting AD Mitchell in the draft and some of the other later picks. I think their O line is going to be really good. But I just feel like it's a matter of question mark with the health of their quarterback. Same thing I kind of have for the Jets. So if he's gone at that point, there you go. And then Kansas City, we all know what Kansas City is. That's going to
Yeah.
be a tough game. It's a tough damn game every year. Even though the Bills have won in the regular season, they're coming to Buffalo. You never know if that's going to be some bizarre world event where Kansas City only wins here. Like, I don't even want to entertain that. But yeah, Uber, any final thoughts on the schedule? Anything else you want to talk about before we get to the floor ceiling topic?
I mean, I did just want to. I wanted to bring up one game, I guess, in particular. The Lions game is really exciting to me, and I know you've referenced prove it games, and all the ones you've referenced make complete sense to me. Kansas City a prove it game, Miami prove it game, like all there's so many prove it games on the schedule. I think the Detroit game is a prove it game, and the reason I think that is for the past few years, the one thing that's been missing with the Bills for me is they're just not nasty, and that's the phrase I keep using. They're just not nasty enough, right? They kind of get kicked around a little bit at times, and I have a buddy who's a Jets fan, and he keeps comparing the Bills of this era to the Colts of the era past with Peyton Manning, where they were a really good offensive team and they could score on you all you want. But if every once in a while they get their asses handed to them just because they weren't physical enough, or they weren't tough enough, or they weren't nasty enough. And I think this Bills team quietly was built to be a little nasty this season. The reason I say that
I agree with that.
is specifically the safeties too. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer, I love them both. Like two of my favorite players. I have a Jordan Poyer jersey. I will be buying a Micah Hyde jersey. I hope they both get their names, up on the rafters in the new stadium. But they got to a point in their careers where their ability to be that nasty wasn't really there. And now you bring in Cole Bishop, who's an absolute missile when he comes down from deep.
Yeah.
You have Taylor Rapp, who's renowned as a missile to a negative extent. And then Mike Edwards is a solid hitter too. The Bills have kind of built this back end of their defense to be a little scary. So if you're going to throw the ball over the middle, they're going to come up and hit you. And when you play a team like Detroit, who's incredibly physical, and they're not as big a throwing team, although Jared Goff put up numbers last year, they are a running team. They're physical up front. Like, that's a prove it game to me. That's a game where I want the Bills to go to Detroit and go toe to toe with that Detroit team. That is a very, very good Detroit team, and go in there and beat the snot out of them. Like, turn the tables a little bit there. And if I see Buffalo, let's say everything goes well heading into that game and Buffalo goes in there and beats the snot out of Detroit, I think I'll leave that game more confident than I was at any point last season, because I'll say, okay, this team's a little different now. So when the playoff comes around, they start getting kicked around maybe a little bit by Kansas City or some team like that. They kind of have a counterpunch at this point. Maybe they can take a swing at the big guys.
That point you brought up is great. I think that's something that I have been suspicious of. And I did the episode with Anthony last week where we talked about the Bills' offensive identity. What is it going to look like? But beyond just offense, it really does feel like they are trying to build a more physical team, not even just pass catchers, but running backs, offensive line, safeties, and, in certain elements, they have a lot of people from the old regime still coming in, but it does feel like the whole team identity is shifting, right? And you see kind of, the coaching changes that happened this offseason, and you bring in Babbage to be your guy now. And of course, you still have Joe Brady, who's a younger guy. And now you're giving this new identity in your coaching room. You move on from Butler and you bring in a die, like those types of moves. But now talk about some of the personnel changes directly. And what you have is a team that could very well be shaping itself to look like a new version of the Bills. And I think that would answer and kind of calm a lot of the questions and nerves that people have about the team itself. Because when you see, well, they got Keon Coleman, but he's not a separator. That's not what the Bills did. And I was someone who said that, I thought the Bills were going in their typical direction and doing a thing I thought they were going to do. They get him. Oh, they got this guy. They drafted a rotational 3T. Why? Well, maybe this guy's got a physical presence, and a guy like Dwayne Carter or Javon Solomon isn't their prototypical edge archetype. Why did they go for this kind of guy? Well, this guy's got long hands and he's really aggressive. These are long arms, not long hands. But these are the kinds of things that kind of indicate to me, to the point you were making, that it really is a Bills team that might try to up their physicality and in turn be a little bit more nasty. And when you look at some of the teams you're playing, right? So Arizona, for example, Arizona is a tough team because Kyler Murray is so mobile, and with his deep arm, he's able to stretch the field out on you. They got some new receivers, but a team that's physical can get Kyler Murray rattled and make him make mistakes. You've seen that in the past. I can think of that Rams game in the playoffs a few years ago where the trenches were dominating and he was just flustered and making terrible decisions. That pick six. You look at Miami, a team that has been known to struggle with physical teams, especially ones that have top tier talent. And then you look at some of the other teams on your schedule, and the Jets with Aaron Rodgers, a veteran quarterback. How do you get inside a veteran quarterback psyche? You hit him a little bit. You're nasty. You're physical. It's not going to work on everybody. There are going to be games on the schedule that they lose, but I love that point that you bring up, because that Detroit game, that's a team that wants to rip your head off. Dan Campbell coaches the hell out of that team to be aggressive, to take the risk, to make the gamble. That's a great prove it game and kind of a litmus test to how you shape up, even if it is an NFC team, with some of your other contemporaries in the AFC. Because if you go toe to toe with the Lions, beat them in their home stadium like you did on Thanksgiving, or at the very least give them a great game with some of the new personnel, that's a really good sign that your team is kind of progressing into the level you want them to be at, and also a great identity to have if you make the playoffs, have any home games in Buffalo in the cold weather, but have the ability to maybe push around in the trenches and run the ball on teams if you need to, really disrupt their interior O-line with your D-line, because maybe Daquan Jones is healthy, who's already nasty, but you rotate Carter in and Solomon does well. This is all obviously wishful thinking for a lot of these projections, but I agree with you. I think that's an excellent point, and I think that game's a great litmus test for it. I think the only other game on here, because there's so many, again, like you said, so many prove it games, but one game I'm really freaking pumped to watch is that San Fran game, man.
Yeah.
You got Brock Purdy and friends coming to Buffalo, a primetime game. That is as big of a prove it game as you can
Mm,
really get. Like, one, I know they didn't win it, but Super Bowl runner-up comes to your town. What are you going to do? Are you going to roll over and die, or are you going to continue to kind of beat those? You're not, question mark, window closed allegations, and go out, kick
mm.
their ass like you did Dallas last year, silence a lot of critics, and just really show that your team is still competitive. I think that's the game I'd look at, but ultimately, it's a tough schedule right now. We'll see how it progresses, but I'm excited for it. And Uber, do you have any final thoughts?
No, the 49ers game is a really good point too. Like that's just a freakishly good football team. Like that's not a team that you can take lightly. Like I know I brought up the idea that the Bills are undefeated after the bye. The 49ers are a different team. I do think the idea of Sean McDermott against against Shanahan will be fun to watch. See what McDermott can dial up to kind of confuse Brock Purdy, because you can confuse Brock Purdy. The Ravens did last season, and then deal with Christian McCaffrey. So that's going to be. Man, that's going to be a fun game. And who knows, the way the schedule goes, that might be a game Buffalo needs. So that might be a game coming out of the bye week where we're like, all right, the Bills got to handle business at home against Purdy and the 49ers.
But also, I mean, when you talk about the matchup versus Shanahan, Sean McDermott's been successful against Mike McDaniel. And that's a Shanahan disciple. So you have kind of the prototype to how to scheme defensively against the Shanahan offense in your own division. And should you have enough success with that this year with some of the new personnel decisions you've made, congratulations, your blueprint's there. You've already played that team twice. Run that same thing out for San Francisco, who, in my opinion, while they're still every bit as talented as any team in the league, and they're still a very tough out, I don't think has the same level of speed as Miami does. I think when you look at like kind of the receiving personnel decisions that Miami's made, it's been insane and they're a thorn in your side. But if you can get the best of them and scheme for them appropriately, I really think you'll have a lot of success in the San Fran game, especially with Brock Purdy going on the road in unfamiliar territory, beginning of December. Like, that's a game that I'm super pumped to watch and I think would be a litmus test. But I want to continue this discussion. But before we do, there's just one thing I got to do. I actually forgot to do this last week, so forgive me to our great leaders of this network, because that was my bad. But I will not forget it this time. I am merely stalling because I am trying to find the clip. Here it is. Greg and Aaron want to tell all of you about the One Pass. So, gentlemen, what do you got?
Many people ask us the best way to support us here at Cover One, and that is to sign up to become a Cover One Pass member. That contribution helps give us the access to all the data and information we use to create the content that you love.
And I think most importantly, brings you into our community of insiders. It's a great community based on Slack. I know a lot of people don't want to be on social media anymore or be in on those conversations. We bring all of it to you right in our great community of educated fans. And most importantly, you get access to our content creators.
Even better than that, everybody loves merch. You get awesome t-shirts, a cool decal, and a letter from the Cover One team signed directly to you.
All for $60. That gets you the entire season, next year's free agency and draft. $60. Click the link in the description. Cover One Insider. Become one today.
Yes, friends. For just 60 Crescent Shards, you can become a Cover One Insider. That One Pass is the lifeblood of our network. It allows us to have access to all of the resources that we use on a day-to-day basis to provide content for anyone who engages with our network. I know Uber provides a lot of advanced data on his Twitter, which you should be checking out, as well as articles throughout the year, which are incredible reads and provide you with a lot of insight and knowledge. And we could not be able to do that without you subscribing to the One Pass. So if you are interested, it is in the description below. Thank you all so much to anyone who has signed up or is thinking about signing up. This is your sign to do it. Now, let's continue on. We talked about a little bit about floor and ceiling. That was really what I wanted to kind of cap off this episode with, because it's very early to be making predictions. So we're going to make some predictions. And what I think is this team, again, like I said before, has a ton of question marks. We all know that there's uncertainty surrounding them. I'm not so optimistic to the point where I can't acknowledge that this team has a floor that exists as well as a ceiling. In fact, I said this, I think, on when you guys did your episode last week. I commented something about how I feel like this, and it's honestly kind of where I got this idea for this episode from, but it feels like this is the first time probably since 2019 where there's a visible floor for the team, because you're just not sure what they could be, where all of these personnel changes they made either would take a significant amount of time to really implement, and maybe some of the offensive scheme isn't working, or maybe some of these receivers are slowly gelling and they don't get to a hot start. They lose some of these games against the AFC. Maybe they're at 500 or below, or they come out of the gate running. Things were fine-tuned quickly. Players are getting it, and they're a team that's poised to have 12 wins. So I want to ask you, just given the schedule, given some of the offseason decisions, kind of a culmination of everything you've seen so far, what do you think right now in your mind is more likely for this team, the floor or the ceiling? And what do you think those actually are in your eyes? Loaded question.
Oh, that is a loaded question. I will say this. So I do have actual records that I have right now for ceiling and floor. I do a whole thing on the AFC East over the summer where I go through each team and I provide the ceiling and floor, and I do a way too much research on that for anybody that does this for a hobby. So I'm not quite there yet. So I'm not 100% confident with what I'm about to say, but this is my general thought going into it right now. So I'm going to start with just giving you the records for my ceiling and floor, and then I'm going to explain where I'm at here. So my ceiling, 13-4. I think 13-4 is the Bills' ceiling this season. I don't see them going 15-2 or some 14-3. I think if everything gels and everything goes right, this is a 13-4 team, and I think 13-4 is probably the 1 seed in the AFC. So I think that would be just about the ceiling for the Bills. The ceiling, ultimate ceiling, obviously, is a Super Bowl, and I still think this team is capable of that. The floor, and maybe this will have people calling me a homer, but I do not care. The floor for me is 9-8. Okay. It's above 500. It's not, 7-10, 8-9. I can't imagine a team led by Josh Allen going below 500. I just can't visibly see it outside of Josh Allen's rookie season. And even the year he didn't have Stephon Diggs, he had Cole Beasley and John Brown. The Bills went 10-6. The Bills still have talent on this roster, and I know they've lost players, but I think a lot of the players they lost are being overblown. Stephon Diggs, Mitch Morris are my two biggest ones. Mitch Morris was still very, very good last year. Stephon Diggs is probably still a top 10 wide receiver in the NFL. So just pretending like losing them won't have any impact on this team, I think, is crazy. But like Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer I talked about earlier, I don't think they were the players last year that they were for most of their career. So I think the Bills could improve there. And then health on top of that, bring back Matt Milano, let Terrell Bernard play in a freaking playoff game against the Chiefs would have been nice. I also just completely, forgot that Christian Benford didn't play in that game either. So all these things, I think that the Bills' floor is 9-8. And I think what you said is really on point, is there's a visible floor. Like I can see that floor happening. I can literally see them hitting that floor. At the end of the day, I think they go 11-6. Like I'm comfortable being right in between those two. And I know that's kind of cheating, almost like halfway in between the floor and ceiling. I don't see any of the AFC East teams sweeping the Bills. I think it's more likely they do that to them. Like the Bills aren't going to go 0-2 against the Jets. They're not going to go 0-2 against the Dolphins, and they sure as hell aren't going 0-2 against the Patriots. So there you have 3 wins at minimum right there. And then there's some other stretches too we talked about where I could see 4 wins. So now I'm already at 7. And I just don't see them hitting the floor. If I had to pick between where I think they're going to be, the floor or the ceiling, I think they're going to be closer to the ceiling at the end of the day. Like if I have to pick one, because again, it goes back to Josh Allen and for all the grief he gets from NFL fans, for all the grief he gets from other teams, like the dude's an absolute freak. And there were points last season where it seemed like he had to put the team completely on his back and he had really no help. I wonder if the vibes changing is something they just needed. Like they just needed something different. And that meant saying to arguably the second best player on your team, thank you for your service. Bye-bye. Like we're going to try something else. And I'm happy they're trying something else, to be honest. Something else had to change. So I think 11-6 is the prediction, 9-8 the floor, 13-4 the ceiling.
I think those are reasonable. I don't think that floor prediction makes you a homer, because 9-8 with Josh Allen sounds like a floor to me. You know what I mean? I think my floor is a little lower. I would say my floor for this team is 8-9, not 9-8. That's what I had going into it. And I'll start there. I'll start with the negative side of it, because you know me, I'm the most negative person on planet Earth, and I'm never optimistic about anything. I think I start there, and my reasoning for that is a combination of 2 very real possibilities that are unfortunately things that I'm going to keep my eye on closely and hope don't happen. One is slow development curve for a lot of rookies and young players you're hedging your bets on, and that includes second-year players. So guys like Dalton Kincaid. or even third year player, guys like Khalil Shakir, and then talking about Keon Coleman or Cole Bishop if he's not panning out as well in that starting safety role. The reality is that one thing that you have to keep in mind with a team that's young and hedging their bets on the draft is the development curve of a lot of your prospects happening at once, which is not saying they won't be good, but that they might not be good right away, that they might need their time, a few weeks to really get acclimated to the pace of the league before they could start shining. But unfortunately, with the stretches this team has early in the year, could lead to some negative results, some early losses, a record that could be as low as like 1-4 or 2-3, something like that. But also the other possibility is injuries. And I'm looking at the starters of this team and I'm looking at the defense specifically. Offensively, I have a lot more confidence in them. Josh Allen is the type of player at this point who can put a team on his back. I don't want to do that. I'd love an even distribution. I think that, when I get to my ceiling talk, I'll talk about how I think it is possible that they could very well have a nice distribution of the ball, not have to be so Josh centric and really be systematic and beat you in a million ways. But on the floor side, offensively, it's not really there for me to be as concerned with injury-wise as much as defensively with guys like Daquan Jones coming back from the torn pec, and you're asking him to start again. Christian Benford, who's consistently hurt throughout the year, as good as he is, I love Benford's game, gets hurt a lot. Rasul Douglas got hurt in that playoff game. He is about to be 30 years old. Mike Edwards is already nursing a shoulder injury. I know I don't really remember his injury history off the top, but it's a thin position that you can't really afford to lose people. Taylor Rapp got banged up a lot last year. Taron Johnson seems to play so physically that he gets himself into some situations. Matt Milano coming off the knee injury. Not knee, leg. I'm not trying to instill any sort of pessimism or concern as much as to say that when I talk about this team's floor, those are the very real things that I have to keep in mind when I discuss it. If this team has a combination of young talent figuring it out and injuries, I just don't see a world where even if McDermott's coaching his ass off, this team can climb out of a hole against a very tough schedule to get themselves to 10 wins, 9 wins. I would love it, and it could happen. I just don't see it. But to flip it, to go to the ceiling, the happy conversation, yay, pretend I didn't just say anything. I see the highest I'll go is 12-5. I think the most realistic is what you said, 11-6. I think that's my absolute, if you had to have me throw a dart at the board and tell you what is their record going to be, I'll say that. I think that 11-6, but I'll say my ceiling 12-5 is why I have that there is really to do with, I think that again, Josh Allen is just the type of player that isn't going to particularly let you get that low and, has that opportunity to really elevate the talent around him. That's kind of the question that we're going to be asking and trying to see solved throughout the year is how does Josh Allen perform with a bunch of players now younger than him entering this offense and trying to kind of enhance it in his own way. But I think in turn, there's a weird feeling of less pressure on Josh Allen now. And I think a lot of that has to do, candidly, with Diggs not being on the team anymore. And I'm not trying to cast aspersions on the player. I don't want this to come off as me hating on Stephon Diggs or anything. I have a Stephon Diggs jersey. I adore the player. I know it didn't work out, and there were a lot of sour grapes from a lot of people. I don't have that. It was time to move on, so be it. But I just got a message from my friend from Steam that just said, no more podcasting, Helldiver. When are you logging on? I'm playing Helldivers after this. And I just saw that and that made me almost lose my train of thought. I think that moving on from Diggs doesn't particularly mean that Diggs wasn't going to contribute anything to this team. But I do think that with him came this sense of pressure, this cloud that kind of hung above the head of the team, not because of him as a person, but because of the standard, because of the fact that they weren't winning, because of the will he, won't he narrative that started with this team. That's gone. It's done. They moved on from it. And I think that losing that component aids the Bills in a way that it's almost like you're not dealing with as much pressure. You're not dealing with that cloud looming over your head. You can almost relax your shoulders, you rip the Band-Aid off. Let's just play and try to play our game. And now talk about Josh Allen, who I think can elevate the talent on this offense. Some of the new additions, which conceptually I am pretty excited for. Some of the additions to the running back room with Ray Davis, who I think is going to be a viable part of this offense. Keon Coleman, who if he's working in tandem with some of the other receivers that could stay on the field. Now adding in the field stretcher and MVS, which I don't think you're going to throw a lot to, but you now have that in your arsenal. I think this offense could still be very productive, productive enough where they're still going to be top 10 in a lot of metrics, still be a top DVOA, top EPA team, and in turn be a lot of fun to watch and keep them in any game they play. So much so that even if this defense is still figuring things out, then this offense could probably help them out in those games. But I will say this, Sean McDermott in that final stretch coached his ass off defensively. Like he did. And there were a lot of injuries at the time. There were players playing banged up. There were players not on the field. There were changes that they had to make midseason that ultimately ended up taking after some time. If this defense can actually stay healthy, if Daquan Jones can stay on the field, if Matt Milano can stay on the field, like if you actually get some luck in your injury room, I was going to say luck in your injury luck, but you know what I mean? I think that this defense can ball out and actually be a top 10 unit as well. And for that reason, I think that would help them hit their ceiling. And it's why I think their ceiling could be a 12-5 team that if they actually have some luck on their side, they'll be able to compete with anybody. Josh can elevate the game. The defense could contribute in some ways. And you could see a team that's still competing for a championship. But ultimately, I'm going to settle in the middle with you, 11-6, even 10-7. Those are the records that I think are actually realistic, most likely, and I hope to see it. So I apologize for the long rant.
No,
please, if you have any other thoughts, Uber, I'm happy to hear it.
I mean, yeah, the luck thing is so important. And you know, I feel like I tweet this every single year that the luck plays a bigger role in the NFL than a lot of people are willing to admit. And whether that's how the ball literally bounces, you go to the Super Bowl, the Chiefs 49ers Super Bowl, the 49ers win if the ball doesn't hit the punt returners. I don't think it was Ray McLeod. Still, maybe it was the punt returner's heel.
Might have been.
Yeah. It literally hit his heel. So you're talking about a game of literally millimeters, and that's how the Chiefs ended up winning the Super Bowl, or a major portion of why they won the Super Bowl. I think that the luck for the Bills, though, the injury luck is paramount. And like Matt Milano to me is the biggest X factor for the Bills always because he's such a freak of a player. If he can stay healthy all year and Terrell Bernard can stay healthy all year, just those two players alone, that's arguably the best linebacker duo in the entire NFL. That makes that entire defense so much better that, I'm with top 10 defense. Yeah. I mean, they could push as high as top 5 if you get a little bit of, health on their side.
Yeah, they were number 10 in overall EPA for defense last year. After all the injuries they went through, after the really rough stretch that they went through in the middle of the season, they turned it around at the end of the year in crunch time. And I also think about some of the trends that are positives for Sean McDermott during his tenure in Buffalo, right? Like his December coaching record or never losing a game coming off the bye. Like there's a body of work with Sean McDermott that has existed despite injuries, despite players going down or rotating in because they can't stay on the field consistently, that have transcended, again, like just so many different factors to a point where I think I can't really turn a blind eye to stuff like that either when I talk about the Bills, because it's doom and gloom when you talk about like, oh, that's a really tough schedule. There's a lot of tough teams, but it's a seasoned coach. It's a quarterback that's entering his 7th year in the league. There's a veteran presence on this team in both the coaching staff and in the personnel that I think can help this team with the right guidance and honestly just playing to the role of understanding that there's a lot of new faces and a lot of people turning to you for leadership where they could realistically thrive in that. And again, like why I brought up that Diggs thing before is just because I don't know if that came out clearly when I was trying to say it. I was trying to piece it together in my mind, but maybe just a change in the vibe, a change in the dynamic and the mentality of the team where, again, that concern, the presence might not be there anymore. Maybe it was more high maintenance than everyone thought it was. Maybe it wasn't. I don't know. I don't know the guy, but rather that just the team might play more loose. They might play more free. It could play a factor in how this team actually goes out week to week. I'm very curious to see how Joe Brady does. If Joe Brady builds upon last year and gets everyone involved and keeps it productive, it could be a good time and a team that could win a lot of games and, honestly silence a lot of doubt. And what I think, I'll make this final point, is imperative too, is this is a team that I still feel is in transition, even when the year starts. Like we are getting out of cap hell. We are still turning this roster to become much younger. I don't think the product on the field this year, as good as it can be, as bad as it can be, whatever it can be, is the finished product. I think that the draft capital you stack for next season is present and going to be used. I think they're going to have an abundance of cap space. Like I will say this to Bills fans, it's not to say don't root for the team. Don't think this team can win games because they can. Absolutely. You always can with Josh Allen. But understand that a lot of roster turnover and rebuilding, retooling of a team will take time and sometimes multiple seasons. What you're seeing isn't going to be well, they could win a championship in theory, and then I guess that could really be the best thing. But
Yeah.
like, even if they do that, I think that this team still has ways to get a lot better in the future years. So it almost is to me like, if they don't hit their ceiling, it's not the end of the world for me because I can call a spade and understand what this team is doing right now. But if they do and exceed expectations, that's just a net positive for everybody. And I'll commend everyone involved for getting them there. If it's Josh Allen, who's just carrying the team on his back, if it's really good defensive coaching by Babich, McDermott, whatever, I could see that outcome happening just as realistically as I could see them hitting their floor. But I think for a team in transition, there's still a really golden opportunity for them to compete.
I think I actually I love that take, man. This is reminding me of 2018 to a point, but on steroids. So 2017, they make the playoffs and they rip it all down because they have to rebuild their cap structure and do all these things with dead cap. And they go into 2018 like, all right, we'll try to compete, but we don't really have an ultimate goal here. Like, let's just see what we got. And what Brandon Beane said at that time is he said, I'm going to always make sure my team can compete while also keeping an eye on the future. And I think that's what they did this offseason is they looked at the team and they said, look, we can get rid of these couple guys. We can save a little bit of money in the future and set ourselves up for serious success in 2025 and beyond, which to your point, like their draft capital is great next year. They have a ton of cap space. They have a lot of youth on the roster, and they locked in their core guys for an extended period of time. So with all of that in mind, 2025 is going to be super exciting. Like what the Bills do in the draft, what the Bills do in free agency, what the Bills do in extending players like a Terrell Bernard will be really fun. But they can still compete this year. And at the end of the day, and I've said his name 100 times, probably because it's his birthday today, like, if Josh Allen's on the field, if Josh Allen's healthy, like I don't give a damn who he's throwing to because he's going to find a way to score 40 touchdowns this year. And if your quarterback scores 40 touchdowns, you're probably going to win a good number of games. So I'm not content in saying like this Bills team is the favorite to win the Super Bowl. I don't think that at all, but I do think that they can still compete for that. And if they can get to the playoffs and if they can stay healthy in the playoffs, I don't see a reason why they can't go beat a Kansas City team. You look at that Chiefs team that just won the Super Bowl, which was fairly healthy in the playoffs, if not completely healthy. I don't remember. Maybe they're missing one starter. The Bills were missing all their linebackers. They were missing Christian Benford. They had an injured Daquan Jones playing. Von Miller was nothing. And they still were a missed field goal away from essentially tying that game, and maybe something crazy happens and the Bills end up winning that. So they're not as far away as they seem, even after all the things that happened this offseason. I'm really excited for this year, especially because, like you said, like it just feels like there's less pressure right now. It feels like people are just like, they're the Bills. Well, what are they going to do? They're not going to win a Super Bowl, and now the Bills can just be like, all right, you can all believe that. We're just going to kind of do our thing and see where it goes this season. And if it doesn't work this season, and next season's another year.
Yeah, exactly. And you bring up 2018. I think my favorite part of 2018 when we look back on it was that was still a top 10 defense. That defense was stellar, actually. Like, do you remember the game they played against New England in Buffalo where they had Tom Brady completely rattled? Like that game.
I was at that game. And when Josh got a concussion, I threw my hat on the ground because I was so pissed off. But
no. I think 2018 was the Derek Anderson game, the Monday night game.
Oh, you're right. I was not at that game. You're right.
Honestly, probably good you weren't because that game was from watching it on TV was miserable because of the Derek Anderson pick six. But like, I think about what I just said, that game, right? I think about a few games in 2018 that quite literally were decided by like one or two plays. You had the Nathan Peterman pick six in Houston. That was one game that you were on your way to winning handedly because they sacked Deshaun Watson 10 times in that game. I'm pretty sure 10 or 8 times. It was a really high number. And I could be exaggerating. I don't have it off the top. I should have looked that up. But they had a strong defensive performance in that game. You look at the Patriot game, again, a game they very easily could have won had they had competent quarterback play. You look at just some of the games in that year, and that was a 6-10 team that very well could have had 8 wins despite how terribly their offense was constructed because it was rookie year Allen with no receivers. This is far and away still a much better team than that. And and a lot of people write them off like they're not going to win, more than 6 games. Now, I said my floor was 8 and 9. I'll stand on that. I think there are a myriad of reasons that would take to get there, but that's the floor. but this team is going to compete. Like, I'm not going to turn a blind eye and get negative and say like this team's going to suck this year. I don't think that's true at all. I think this team is going to compete. I think that this team is potentially, if all things are clicking, still a Super Bowl contender. Whether I'm as confident in that as years past, I'm not sure. It's to be decided. But what I'll say is, and kind of to wrap this up and why I brought this topic up is, even if it isn't the year you win it all, I just think this team's still going to get better. I really do. And that's the thing that's making me just excited for the future. I think this is a medicine year. Medicine years don't necessarily mean bad years. It just means you made the decisions necessary to reconstruct your roster. If this is a team that still competes, then you better be excited for the future, folks, because I think it's going to be very bright. And I'll wrap it up there. Uber, do you have any final thoughts? Anything else that you still wanted to say that I didn't touch upon, we didn't touch upon?
No, I think this was a good conversation. And I think, unsurprisingly, you and I agree on a lot of things. But I do like that at a minimum we do have different ceilings and floors. And I appreciate that you do have the 8 and 9, which I wasn't willing to go to. So that's a good thing. But yeah, this discussion was great, man. It's always fun to come on this show. So
tell people where they can find you, man.
Where
you at?
At Uber Hansen on Twitter. I'm always on there tweeting something ridiculous. Today was a all-out attack on Trevor Lawrence, which I have since halted.
Oh my God.
I think I won that battle. And then on the weekends, it tends to be alcohol-induced conversations on Twitter. And then on Mondays, it's the Cover One Roundup at 7 p.m. Eastern with me and David Foxy. So join us for that show next Monday. I think we have a good idea for that one, which should be posted at some point this week.
I just kind of want to see the Trevor Lawrence take before we sign off while I'm live. I'm on your Twitter right now and I'm trying to. Okay.
Oh.
Do you mind if I read this tweet verbatim? Is that okay?
That the Bizarro one?
Yeah.
You can go for it. Yeah.
Trevor Lawrence is Bizarro Josh Allen. When T-Law came out of college, every analyst said he was a can't miss NFL prospect and refuses to move off that take. When J.A. came out of college, every analyst said he'd have to defy math to succeed and refuse to move off that take. Yeah, okay, so I can understand why Jags fans are pissed at you for this.
Oh, that wasn't even – I had one that compared him to Blake Bortles too, but that's a whole nother.
Oh, my God. Dude, I just remember, so I actually have a story for you. So my one buddy, he watches every week. I appreciate him. He's a Cowboy fan, but he adopted the Jags also. So he's got an NFC team and an AFC team. So he defends. He was there. Him and his fiance were there at the Jaguars game where Trevor Lawrence got hurt. And his fiance actually was on TV, which was wild. I saw that live and I called him or texted them instantly. But he watched the episode we did on the Jaguars preview and heard your Trevor Lawrence takes. And he was like, man, I really wanted to comment, but I didn't. I was going to say, I was going to defend Trevor Lawrence in the comments. I think your Trevor Lawrence agenda is so funny. I like him. I'm going to disagree with you. I like Trevor Lawrence. I think he's very talented, and I think he's going to be a top quarterback. I know everyone's like, when? I think there's a myriad of factors in Jacksonville's offense that contributed to some struggles that weren't just him. However, I think that the stance you've taken is very funny. I always appreciate it. I even see Greg's comment which says, this is the new high water mark for your best take, which, yeah, that's funny. Yeah. But I just want to point that out. But everybody, yes, please check out their show on every Monday night. I've tuned in from time to time, and comment section is always a great time, and they have great discussions. Him and David do great work. His articles throughout the year, as I've always said on this show, you will learn a ton. It's very in-depth. It's honestly just, if you're a Bills fan and you're looking for content and perspective on the team, Uber does a hell of a job with everything he puts out. So please give him a follow. Check those out. For all of you in the comments tonight, thank you so much. This is episode, I know this time of year is a little bit of a lull now that the draft's over. It's only voluntary OTAs, and we're kind of in that weeds part of the off season, but I appreciate anyone who tuned in to check this episode out. I think you should still be quite optimistic. I know there's a lot of question marks about the team, but really, despite the schedule looking tough now, we also say this every single year. It always changes when the season starts, and you got a hell of a quarterback to root for, some exciting young players that could really shape up to be immediate contributors, and a team that I still think is going to be quite competitive despite some question marks. So Thank you all so much for tuning into this week's episode of Under Review. My name is Joe DeRosa. You can find me on Twitter at @show_DeRosa. Again, if you could be as kind as to like this video, share it with your friends. That is always appreciated. The exposure is great for our network, for any Bills fans that are looking for content to consume. We are the channel for you to provide you with any analysis we can, especially in the dry months of the offseason. If you are watching us on YouTube, stick around because at 9 p.m., Anthony Prohaska, my guest last week, will be going live with another episode of Disguised Coverage. If you are listening to us on audio platforms, please share, rate 5 stars if you can. It's always greatly appreciated. That was a lot of fun, Uber. Again, appreciate your time. You're always welcome back here. But for us, we are going to say happy Tuesday. Enjoy your night. And as always, go Bills. We will see you soon.